Thank you so much for joining us in the grass tent. My name is Olivia Wilson. I'm a flower farmer and a florist, and I'm on the board of Flowers from the Farm, which is the trade association for cut flower farmers in the UK. I'm delighted to be chairing this panel today with three very different case studies of different ways of incorporating flower farming into existing models, or it being the very model itself. Just to give you a little overview of what the format of the session is going to be, we're going to have a contextualization by Anna, and then Roisin and Calixta are going to talk you through their practices. Unfortunately, Jo Wright from Organic Blooms was supposed to join us today, but she has not been able to attend, so she sent a short video which we're going to show, and hopefully we can speak a bit on her behalf too. Just to give you a quick introduction, this is Anna Taylor. She is a flower farmer and educator in Saffron Walden. She grows on a micro scale, but also is involved with putting together the first ever floriculture course for trying to get a really clear pathway for people who are interested in flower farming, which is really exciting. That's happening at Capel Manor in Enfield. Roisin, also a tailor, unrelated. It grows on a walled garden in Northumberland. She's going to talk to you more about that, but she also is a researcher. She's just completed a Nuffield scholarship looking at climate resilience in flower farming. And then finally we have Calixta, who is the founder of Flourish Produce, which is not that far from here in Cambridgeshire. She grows over 80 acres, over 750 varieties, and is increasingly using flowers in her business model. So has lots to speak on about that. They're going to speak for about 10 minutes, and then after that I'm going to ask a few questions to kick off the Q&A. Please do ask any questions, that's what we're here for. And afterwards, if anybody wants to meet the flower farmer, we've got a little networking session, so you can stay on to ask any questions that you might feel shy to ask out loud. Thank you so much again for being here. I'm going to pass you over to Anna.
Hello, thank you, Liv. Hello. So we wanted to start off this session by contextualising agroecology with flower farming, and why we've particularly chosen to use the word agroecological growing as opposed to regenerative or sustainable or organic. And mostly I think I went to a really good session yesterday, which was talking about the definitions of them. I think one of the things that makes it so hard to use the word agroecological is because it's so difficult to say. But I'm really going to try hard to say it properly through this session. But we believe, as flower growers, it's the gold standard of growing, and it's more than just a method of growing in as much as regenerative growing is. And it's a science, it's a practice, and it's a movement. Our first slide shows the 13 principles of agroecology, and these are defined by the UN, and they apparently High Commissioner pulled together a panel of experts in food security and nutrition to define these principles. What's that got to do with flower growing? Because it mostly looks and talks about food. But we as growers have got quite lofty belief that if every farm in the UK grew some flowers in one way or another, we would have a much more interconnected agroecological integrated consumption and agricultural system in the UK. You see, the way flowers are grown and consumed in the UK is actually about as far away from an agroecological system as is possible. Currently, we understand the UK cut flower market to be worth about £2.2 billion, but that also includes the imported indoor plants. And that's the first reason why cut flowers aren't really sort of taken very seriously, because they're coupled in with just a load of rubber plants. But saying that, it's worth more than the UK music industry. And most plants, most flowers are imported, about 85% of them, and 70% of those are sold through supermarkets. It's a very, very disconnected system. Yet we believe that flowers are there on pretty much every single occasion, you know, from births, deaths, marriages. I'm sure the vast majority of you have either bought or cut flowers, but aren't necessarily thinking about where they're coming from. So today we want to talk about how cut flowers are really important, and integrating those into an agroecological farming system can do so much good. And if we think about where our flowers are coming, it's a real litmus for how integrated our agroecological farming systems are. So how can we integrate them? So there's four main ways that we're going to talk about it today in the case studies. And that's the first one being biodiversity enhancement with the natural advantages that cut flowers bring to a farming system. So that's in pollen and nectar availability mostly. And then there's also the input reductions and those benefits with integrated pest management and the shorter distance that flowers tend to travel from field to vase. So you have a much more connected relationship with your consumers. Then there's what I suspect everybody's mostly interested in is the economic diversification. And we're going to talk more about those different models, but there's lots of different ways that cut flowers can be integrated into a farming system that considers all the resources that you have, whether it be that time, your market, the amount of space you've got, and the knowledge you've got. But they also can be integrated in a very small scale and in project-based or seasonally. So it's not just a typically an all year, but it can be as well. And then finally, which is where agroecological systems is so important, is that connection both to your client, the health and well-being, but the participation and the education. And it's not just about the flowers, it's the way that consumers then embrace their local and seasonality, and that has a huge knock-on effect with food, of course, which is really what we're talking about.
Forgot I had my own mic then. Thank you so much, Anna. We're just briefly going to show a video now from Jo, which introduces the work that she does at Organic Blooms. I would definitely recommend that everybody takes the time to go and look at their website and find out more about what they do, because they're a really interesting model. They're a 9-acre organic certified farm just outside Bristol. Jo, as well as growing flowers, she also uses it as an opportunity to teach people with additional learning needs ways into horticulture, and she also works with other organic farmers to offer advice about growing flowers on a field scale. So definitely something well worth checking out. But now we'll leave her to say it in her own words.
Good afternoon, I'm Jo Wright and I'm the founder and director of Organic Blooms. Thank you for inviting us to Groundswell today. I just wanted to do a little bit about Organic Blooms. We've been trading since 2005 and we were one of the first certified organic cut flower growers to be certified by the Soil Association as solely cut flower growers rather than part of a mixed farm. And that was back in 2017. We grow on about 9 acres of grade 3 former arable land in South Gloss, and we sell direct to the customer nationally and locally. And we have 2 wholesale contracts, one with Abel & Co. and one direct to Flower Vision in Bristol. We are also a social enterprise, so we very much believe that community is at the heart of our business, and we provide City and Guilds training and paid work to people who are marginalised in the workplace. So mostly people with Asperger's and autism, but also people who've experienced mental health difficulties. So that's us in a nutshell. This is a drone shot of our site back in 2018, actually, so we're a lot bigger now, but you can see that we grow in beds to make harvesting and rotation planning easier. We've got a bit more than 20, we've got about 30,000 metres square under tunnels. And we grow, we curate our species quite carefully. obviously with a view to future-proofing for climate change, but we choose species. We don't have any divas on our farm, apart from a few polytunnel crops that like zinnias that require a little bit more, but we're tending to choose species that are robust and able to survive with few inputs. But also they have to have marketable value, of course. So perennials now form the backbone of our growing. Achillea, cloth of gold there, you can see in the picture. We fall in love with things that we didn't used to like. They're slightly harsh colour, but that are brilliant to pick and great in a drought. So lots of these species we grow are derived from meadow and prairie species because they're used to competing in grassland. As with most sustainable businesses now, we've got rid of all packaging, almost all of our packaging. We only wrap in paper where we need to put a label on or protect. And obviously craft and cardboard packaging tend to be the mainstay. And as I said before, that we employ 8 people with support needs within our social enterprise. And actually, we're trying to make them year-round jobs and at above even living wage, so that we are giving fair jobs and stability to people who don't have that normally. It adds so much to our workplace, having a diverse workforce. And those who aren't employed by us are trained in City and Guilds. We've got a lovely qualification that we can do that fits really well with our business.
Hello, my name is Roisin Taylor, as previously stated, and I think what's interesting about the 4 growers, actually, even though Joe is not here, is that we all do represent a different scale on the kind of flower growing scene, I would say. So my background is that I came from conservation. I have no real farming background. I worked on an upland hill farm, but that is not directly translatable into cut flower production. But it did give me a lot of grit and desire to build a dry stone wall every now and then. So that kind of is where my farming love comes from. I worked in conservation. I worked for the RSPB for about 4 years, working in climate change policy. And then I got furloughed and decided to go and work for my mum, who was running Verde Flower Co., which is the business I've now taken over. And she was growing in a Victorian walled garden, about 1.7 acres, but not utilising all that space. What I loved about the business is that she always made space for nature as part of that business. So she was trying to understand how to grow a profitable business in County Durham in the northeast of England, whilst also doing it in a way that chimed with nature. So we were always chemical free from the very beginning. That's not something I've had to change. And I think it's sometimes important to be upfront about that I've not been through that transition, because that's always been ingrained in what I've been doing. So trying to find practices, I haven't had to adopt them. I've just kind of taken them up from the very beginning. And then it was trying to bring those two things together. So the policy learnings on climate change adaptation. So I was kind of looking at things like big scale nature-based solutions. So salt marsh restoration and peatland restoration and tree planting. And then I was looking at my sort of 1.7 acres that I was starting to work on with my mum and really starting to panic about the fact that this business was not super resilient to the storms and the drought and then the flooding and then the 38-degree temperatures that we were experiencing in the sort of cycle of about 9 to 10 months. And consistently our kind of polytunnel infrastructure was being destroyed, and it really put my mum and I in a place of thinking, crikey, how do we make this business work? Because it's already a little bit of a struggle. So how are we going to climate proof it, essentially? So that took me to a Nuffield Farming Scholarship, which please do look at a Nuffield Farming Scholarship, because it has been more transformative to me than my either degree that I have, which are completely irrelevant to anything that I'm doing now, helpfully. And what I wanted to understand was, I wanted to understand the British cut flower industry, what it looked like, because I think up until the last couple of years, it's been pretty darn opaque, actually, particularly when it comes to the large-scale commercial growers, because they're just doing their thing, either selling direct to supermarkets or to wholesalers or whatever that might look like. But trying to get a look in is quite hard outside of the slightly kind of smaller commercial growers like ourselves. So I wanted to understand that. And then I really wanted to understand whether anyone was actually thinking about a 2-degree warming world. And in my interview for my Nuffield, one of the economics questions was not just about Kenyan flowers and how do we outcompete the Kenyans, but also like why 2 degrees? Because aren't we supposed to be hitting 1.5 degrees? And I just openly laughed, which was maybe a rogue approach to take for an interview. But because we know we're hurtling towards that, it's very unlikely we're going to stick below 1.5. And I'm actually a massive optimist, so it's kind of a concerning thing for me to say. So I wanted to kind of get a sense of whether there were whether there were pioneers in the British cut flower industry who were really working on this. I think there possibly are in terms of the smaller scale growers. I think the financial challenge in the past of growing has been quite enormous. And what we're not going to cover today, but I think is worth mentioning, is a lot of the large scale commercial growers are going out of business hand over fist. They either do not have someone generationally to hand on to because the kids aren't seeing horticulture as particularly attractive as an industry, or the cost of keeping 24 hectares of glasshouses in rotation is actually too enormous. I mentioned earlier in the climate adaptation talk I was doing that we really need government backing. We need a horticulture strategy. And I know that's a bit policy focused and not agroecology, but I think it speaks to the fact that government aren't really paying attention to horticulture. They certainly aren't paying attention to cut flowers, but actually there's a lot of really exciting developments, particularly in the agroecological space, and opportunities as a direct result of what's happening with climate change that we should be building into kind of wider strategy stuff. So with that in mind, I have been landless for the last couple of years while I've been doing my Nuffield, so kind of coincidentally worked out for me because I probably couldn't have run a flower farm at the same time as trying to do all the international travelling. And that international travelling took me to Kenya, to the Netherlands, to New Zealand, and all around the UK. I would have done more if I could have afforded it, but it's hard to travel, it's expensive. And I was trying to get a sense of things like human resilience. So what are the key lessons that we need to learn in terms of being battered by climate change time and time again? Because in the UK, we're like super privileged, which if you're an arable is probably a shocking thing to hear, but that we are not hit massively comparatively to, we're not on the front line of climate change compared to places like Kenya or New Zealand where they're getting hit by cyclones all the time. So it was about learning from that. What do we need to learn in community with one another and how we do that knowledge and exchange stuff, which Flowers on the Farm do really well. And then it was also thinking about what lessons can I take back to my own land when I eventually get some. Thank God I have. Things like right plant, right place, understanding about what perennials are going to outlast and be able to survive the ups and downs of climate change. So there's kind of lots going on. And now I am very fortunate to be, that's my dog there, Sasha, in a 2.2 acre walled garden. So a little bit of an advancement on what was there before. Lots of established perennials, very good worm-rich soil, but in the past had been a vegetable growing plot, probably for the last 100 years had been vegetables for the entire 4,000 acre estate. So quite compacted soil and a massive mare's tail problem. Lots of good foliage, but it is in a flood zone. It's never been flooded since 1763, which is remarkable. But the one thing I've learned from my travels is that climate change is going to get you when you least expect it. And then to just kind of, oh, hello, there we go. There's some more contextual what the land looks like. I moved in 3 months ago, and the things that I have immediately started on as a flower farmer and trying to, work out with the land, about to start soil testing. I'd like to get some and understand what biology I have, and also probably understand the heavy minerals that might be in the land. But soil is really at the heart of what I'm doing. It's at the heart of agroecology. So the testing stuff is really important. Simple things like using Soil Mentor, which is a great app, and bricks testing as well for the plants, the annuals that I am growing is going to be really core to what I'm doing, because good data makes a big difference in making decisions. As I said, the soil is pretty good in places. However, it's fairly compacted because of the vegetable growing in the past. So what I'm wanting to do is go back to looking at the cover crops that we were using in the past, things like Phycelia, but also specific types of ryegrass. And I've got vetch galore, so I probably don't need any more of that. But I think what's critical about this process is thinking about what is the balance in terms of agroecology between a sustainable business in terms of like, am I making enough money? Is this viable for me and potentially the people I employ, as well as the local environment in terms of like the ecosystem and the flowers that I'm producing in the soil. How do I limit tillage? Pretty easy, don't do it. And also things like rainwater collection, which is absolutely vital to me because we haven't despite saying it's a flood zone, we haven't got much water up there. So things like irrigation, working out what works for me. But the sort of point I'm trying to make with explaining this is that I'm at the very beginning of establishing a new flower farm, and I'm trying to put in best practice from the beginning, but that will all probably go tits up relatively quickly, and I'll just have to keep adapting. And that's part of that resilience question. The other side of this, and I will finish so lovely Calixta can talk to you about the economics, is the biodiversity piece, which is vital to me because I do this job 3 days a week, and then I run UK Youth for Nature, which is a youth campaigning organisation all across the UK 3 days a week. And so biodiversity matters, and the garden literally hums. It's got this insane, I'm not talking about crazy vibrational energy, I just mean the number of insects in there is absolutely astounding, possibly because it's been left to do anything with for the last 6 years. But I still think we can do more. And that means mess and not thinking about control of every single habitat, but letting things go a bit wild, trying to understand baselining of what species I have and how I can develop them. Also, where in this 2.2 acres can I develop a decent meadow, and what does that meadow look like, and how does that translate into good beneficial pollinators and pests, not pests, but kind of predators to pests that will help my business in the long run. I think I'll stop there on some of the bits that I've been doing, and we can bring them up in questions later. But just to finalise by saying a lot of this stuff is like common sense and has been done for hundreds of years, but we've just, as is the kind of trend with this festival, we've just recognised that we've lost it, we've lost touch with that. But it's simple, it's exciting, and it's possible, and that's what I want to leave you with. Calixta.
Great. Can I have the clicker?
Yes, of course.
Thank you so much. Hello, everybody. I'm Calixta, I'm from Flourish Produce, and I just want to start by saying that I'm still figuring out the flowers. I do not have all the answers. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about our experience with how we've evolved over the last few years in terms of growing and selling them. So firstly, I would say that flowers are quite a small part of what we do on the farm overall. We farm 80 acres of fresh produce, and predominantly that's vegetables, herbs and salads. Flowers are 5.25% of our sales, so they are quite a small portion, but a very important portion overall. The model of our farm business is put as many eggs in as many different baskets as possible. So we really embrace the idea of diversity in every single way and every aspect of our growing, but also of our business. And in terms of varieties, we're growing 750 different varieties, and they are sold through multiple different outlets. So we deliver direct from the farm to restaurants, florists, shops, bakeries, delis, and so on in London and the Cambridgeshire area. And we also have an on-farm shop. We have veg boxes, produce boxes with flowers as an add-on that we deliver to people's homes in London and Cambridgeshire. And we also sell our products via wholesale. So lots of different avenues. And that kind of brings me on to the flowery part. So flowers have been a huge part of our farm, predominantly for the agroecological reasons. So we include them everywhere on our farm. And in one of the photos on there, you can see the marigolds that we use to bring pollinators into our polytunnels to help with the tomatoes. We intercrop flowers in the fields. We plant them in our harvest lanes for all of our field scale production. We leave lots of wildflower strips and pollinator gardens to try and bring in as many insects for integrated pest management, as well as the pollination benefits that we've chatted about. Half of our land that we're farming is in green manures, which is heavily included in wildflowers as well. And then we have very complex rotations, some of which means leaving annuals to go to flower. So there are flowers absolutely everywhere on the farm, just as they are. But along with the agroecological benefits, I think it's also really important to mention the other aspects of sustainability. And that's the kind of like social people part, and also, of course, the financial part, because without understanding where and how you're going to make money, all the agroecological stuff is kind of impossible to support and continue with. So that brings me on to some aspects about how we grow and sell flowers. So over the years, we've tried many different things, and our sort of main workhorse in terms of flowers are deli bunches, which Anna actually branded the name for us, which essentially is larger scale production of fewer things. So we've spread that throughout the year. In the spring, we have tulips, then we have peonies, then we have dahlias and sunflowers. They're crowd pleasers. They're easy to grow en masse. They are wrapped very quickly and efficiently by our team and sold to shops all over London and in the local area. And we have a really good margin on those. They're very easy to do. And overall, even though it's not necessarily the direction that we thought we'd end up going in, they are the backbone of our flower business for sure. We also grow other things. So we have specific varieties that we grow of more unusual perennials that we sell direct to florists. And then you get a much higher value on those items. So think, I don't know, tomato tendrils with little baby green tomatoes on them, or fennel fronds from the flowering bronze fennel that we've been cutting for our chef herb bunches. And those are items that florists can't get anywhere else, and so we can sell them for a much higher value. But there is something that goes hand in hand with that it's quite hard to forecast. And forgive me for saying this, but florists we find quite hard to work with because of the endless communications, WhatsApps, sort of photo taking, etc. But you get out what you put in, and it's definitely an important part of what we do, though a slightly smaller fraction of the pie. We have also launched a pick your own flower field this year, which has been going super well. It gets the public who come to our shop out on the farm, in the fields, engaging with the farm, understanding about pollinators. They have an amazing time. They go to the farm shop and spend more money, and just have a really nice experience. So for us, that's been something that also is quite lucrative in that we have very little labour costs associated with that because they're picking their own flowers, which is fantastic, and works very well for both sides. So I think just to kind of round off a little bit, I want to just quickly mention some of the real opportunities of flowers, and especially diversifying in them, is you have a very high quality crop that I've got a wasp near me. That thing's been following me around all day. You've potentially got very high quality crops that you can sell for a lot of money, which I think can be a real beneficial, especially if you've got other things, commodity crops or other avenues to market that can be a little bit more challenging depending on external variable factors. And I think also there is definitely growing demand for British flowers, particularly if you're certified. So we're very lucky, we're organically certified, and as of September, we'll be biodynamically certified. And we've certainly found that certification process opens many, many doors and avenues to market for us. But the challenges, which I definitely think it's important to mention, are, growing very high quality flowers can be very hard if you don't know what you're doing. We are still learning what we're doing. Ultimately, flowers have value to the farm in their environmental benefits, but they have value to the customer and the consumer for purely really aesthetic values, which in some ways is quite superficial. So there's less understanding of the sort of imperfections and the variability, especially if people are used to buying flowers from supermarkets and so on. And also, I think, building that market is a challenge, and then the kind of communications and developing that is definitely an extra added piece of work that needs more work, but it's growing. It's kind of going hand in hand. So I think I'll finish there.
Thank you so much. I'd actually like to put that question to both Roisin and Anna. What do you think are the biggest opportunities and challenges for introducing flower growing onto your existing model?
I think if you have a lack of experience in flower production, the beginning, it can feel really overwhelming. So knowing where to start. I think the benefit of sort of opportunity of this is if you're particularly a farmer, you really know your land intimately, or you should know your land pretty intimately. And so the opportunity to kind of, you know your land well enough, you've kind of got a map of where you could place something or how something's going to respond. And then actually probably the best thing to do is get in contact with a local, maybe a smaller scale cut flower producer, and work kind of in collaboration to understand what might best work on a specific piece of land. Because right now the information isn't really out there. That's what we're trying to do more of, is share that and bring kind of connection between larger scale commercial growers, but maybe in arable or, I don't know, even dairy or whatever. And then the kind of knowledge hubs in the smaller growers who've maybe been doing it for decades, but are just doing it on a much smaller scale. So I think there are lots of opportunities, but I think that a barrier is around that knowledge piece. And so connecting up enables you to be able to do that. And also that then means that you're getting knowledge exchange back. So there might be something that you're doing as a like a commercial grower at a larger scale or in a different sector that might be transferable over to us as smaller growers that would be really beneficial to us too.
Yeah, it's quite a pessimistic start, isn't it, with the challenges? But the other huge challenge is because there aren't that, as we spoke, there aren't that many people growing cut flowers, and so it's getting to your consumer, and they're not necessarily aware of, as Calixta said, that, you know, the different imperfections or how flowers are grown, or even when a natural season is. And maybe for everybody in this tent that might be obvious, but a lot of people think that roses grow in February, you know, and there's a big education piece, but it is an opportunity. I'd like to sort of reframe it as an opportunity, but there's a big challenge at that route to market, and that's something that Liv's working on. But that's another way of getting together with other growers. I think one of the biggest ways around all of these problems is working with other established growers, and talking to each other. Yeah.
And what about the opportunity? What's the biggest opportunity, do you think? I think you answered that to you, Anna.
Biggest opportunity. I think there is huge potential, and perhaps like Roisin, I'm very optimistic, but I think every single farm and landowner has got the potential to put cut flowers into their business model in one way or another. There's lots of different ways. I think there's also potentially lots of challenges, and starting to grow cut flowers in a way that causes a huge amount of problem initially. And I think getting advice and planning that according to your resources is, and I mean in terms of the time you've got, the availability, your market, your climate, your soil. There's so many different ways in there, but there's also so many different ways we can grow cut flowers. So that could be what seems to be obvious, which is like annual flowers, but actually in view of climate change and how much resource they take, I'm not sure they're that easy to sell to a great profit. So it's things like growing perennials and shrubs, woody plants. I call it agroforestry, and growing woody shrubs and trees and climbers as shelter barriers, and investing rather than just in native hedgerow plants, investing in woody material that then can just be left alone for 5-7 years and then come along and crop it in the future. I really think there's long-term business in that, but that takes a bit of courage to have a go at that.
Can I just say that when I was doing a lot of my interviews, the wholesalers, the British wholesalers, particularly, given that we're losing some of our... So we've lost 50 million tulips this year because of one company being dormant, which is quite staggering. So there are opportunities to fill those gaps, which I think is important. It might just require us to do some thinking about how we're going to do that. But a lot of the British wholesalers are saying, yeah, we could take more. We could take 2-3 times the amount. It's just I can't get my hands on them and the supply chain doesn't quite link up yet. And so there's a lot of work going on in the background with Flowers on the Farm and probably much more widely, Nature Friendly Farming Network, lots of different organisations trying to work out, okay, how do we solve that problem? And if we can crack that, that means that there are routes to market that are more well established. But I think the wholesalers can take them. I mean, we love flowers. We are a nation of flower lovers. And that wasn't the case for a lot of the countries that I was going to visit. And they were still outstripping us in terms of market share. So...
Yeah, I just think to add to that from a floristry perspective, especially based in London, there is a huge demand for locally grown flowers, and it really is only increasing. They just can't get it yet. And what we need is more people who are already in the business of growing things on a commercial scale to be turning their attention towards flowers in a serious and professional way. And I think that is something that people need to get their heads around, because I think a lot of people really care about the food. They care about the food that they're growing, and then they sort of think of the flowers as a frivolous extra. But that just it simply isn't the case, not only because growing flowers actually contributes to us feeding our stomachs, but also flowers feed our souls. And I think that people, that's something we increasingly need in society. The relationship to flowers is intrinsic. And I think that joy and that life-giving that flowers offer us is just something that we just people need to take seriously. And I think actually I've been on the Flowers from the Start farm stand over the last 2 days, and it's been fantastic. There's been lots of people have coming to talk to us saying, oh, my wife is really interested in that. And I found that comment is really, really fascinating, because it always people seeing it as an adjunct to the real business. But I just feel really passionately that this is a business that people need to invest in. We are working really hard within Flowers from the Farm and with people who aren't members yet, or to create those routes to market, because people want the flowers. We need the world to grow these flowers in better ways, because it's horrifying the way that flowers are grown internationally. I think people don't quite realise it, because there's not the same regulation as food, because we don't consume it. The practices are, they're actually horrifying. As a florist, I wouldn't want to touch with my bare hands any flowers that have been growing in the level of chemicals. And that's when they get to me in London. That's not when I'm growing them in a glass house without ventilation. There's huge issues here. And I think that there is huge opportunity to impact seismic change, actually, because it's really not small. As we've been mentioned, the figures, this is a huge industry. And actually the taste for flowers, and increasingly, as the nations get more wealthy, there is more market for it, and that's not going away. So yes, I really hope that everyone here is seriously considering this, not as something frilly, because the petals might be frilly, but flower farmers are not. I can tell you that much. I just wanted to ask one question before we take it to the audience, because I feel that there's probably people who have a lot of practical things that they want to be asking. So I'm just going to start off with, what is a top tip for someone practically wanting to introduce flowers onto their farm? This doesn't have to be your top tip, but one that you would think people should be considering that you haven't mentioned already.
Can I start?
Go. Yeah, go.
I would say consider efficiencies, because in terms of your production, because labour is a huge thing. Cut flowers require an enormous amount of labour. And so anything that you can do to establish systems of efficiency right from day one, that will majorly impact whether you're going to make any money on those things or not.
I would say it's absolutely fine to start really small and start testing and trialing things. And actually, particularly if you're a new entrant, or you're a very established grower or producer of some sort, it would be totally reasonable, and it's not frilly, and it's not messing around at the edges, to start doing a little test plot and say what works really well, and actually, does this sell well on the market? If I took this produce this is what I'm doing. If I take this to my wholesaler, are they going to reject it because the stem length isn't good enough? Or is the quality good enough? All those kind of pieces. So start testing and see this as a kind of long-term piece that actually can build and build and build. And don't feel that you have to do what I did and jump in at the deep end, but you really can get there. But I think that testing and trialing piece is really important, and collect the data from that. When I say data, keep a notebook. Know what you like, know what you hate. If you don't like growing something, Anna taught me this very well, you probably won't look after it. So yeah, testing and trialing, and then take notes and data about that.
I've got two. One is, if you're a landowner or a farmer, is to have a really good look around your farm. Don't just think, oh, I've got an acre and that's great soil and it's south facing, so that's where I'll grow cut flowers. It's actually I think there's a lot of opportunity in the bits of land that perhaps previously you got paid for setting aside that actually could produce a crop and do farm work a lot harder, or there could be a bit of inaccessible land for machinery. That could be a little corner, because you don't actually need, even though Calixta, I don't know how many acres you said you're growing cut flowers on. Did you say?
It's just probably about 2-3.
Only 2 or 3. I mean, that's huge for most cut flower growers in the UK. You only, half an acre here, an acre there. That's a huge amount of space. Look at margins, and if you need to put a bit of shade in, or as I said about the agroforestry, just look at it a bit differently. Spend some time researching, and just think about it. Yeah, it's not those traditional annuals. Don't look there to start with. And then the other thing I'd say is go and talk to florists and find out what they want. Rather than just go and grow something that you think looks like a good cut flower, find out what they want, find out what other growers are growing. There may well be a niche. And certainly where we are in Cambridgeshire and Essex and Herts border, between us different growers, we've got different niches. I know there's different plants and I can get from different growers that grow them really well, just because, I don't know, it might be their location, their soil, or just they particularly love that plant. But I know I can always get poppies from one person, always delphiniums from another, and that can be really, really good for the florist, the consumer and the grower, not to try and do everything.
Great, thank you so much. Does anybody have a question? You in the front row with a white shirt on. There's going to be a mic coming round.
Thank you. I have 2 questions, which hopefully can share the load of answering. One is about the supply chain, and that is companies like Freddie's Flowers. Do you see them as important in growing awareness and building the market for kind of more locally produced flowers? Would it be helpful for a company like that to be more spread throughout the UK? And then the second question is about economics, so the margins. So are you guys able to maintain a similar sort of margin profile to the imported flowers, because you are, I guess, my assumption is you're replacing sort of import logistics costs with, I guess, the costs of growing in a kind of more sustainable seasonal way. So how do the economics stack up versus imported stuff, and what's the role of companies like Freddie's Flowers?
Can I just ask a question about the Freddie's Flowers question? Do you feel that they do work with locally grown flower farmers or not?
So as a consumer, my outside in perspective is that they are trying to be better than your average flower delivery company. I don't know if that's greenwashing. I would be curious to get your perspectives on it.
Does anyone? I can speak on this. Does anyone else want to sort of say? I think that greenwashing in the floristry industry is wild. It is insane.
Strap yourselves in.
No, I don't think I can actually probably speak on record necessarily. But if you want to come and talk to me, I will say a lot. But I think that they're interesting when people use things like locally grown or direct to the grower, because where that grower is definitely not transparent in their supply chains. And I think a lot of these bigger growers are interesting in that they're able to potentially miss out the middlemen and buy direct from a grower, but that doesn't really mean it's not really the same. It conjures a nice image, basically, but I don't think that that's necessarily representative of the practices that are happening. But there is an interesting thing with people like Freddie's Flowers and those kind of companies, is that they have a lot of the share of the market now, so they wield a lot of the power, and they are able to have relationships with growers. So, for example, they could potentially buy all the certified flowers from one farm, which means that it's more difficult for our other florists to get them. So there's kind of an ethical thing at play there. Potentially they are able to buy something which might be a bit better, but it does have a dramatic impact on the floristry industry otherwise. There is a company called Uncut Stems, who is a subscription service which sells only British grown flowers in the UK, and I think that supporting those kind of subscriptions is much better. I think that subscription models like Freddie's Flowers, they distort the value of flowers a bit like supermarkets do, but I think that the kind of model and the flower growing that we're talking about, they're probably not your market necessarily. They're people, you want to sell to people who care about really care about where their flowers come from and are willing to sort of take the glasses off and actually really look into it, not just be sold by a line which is easily repeated by people who are selling them on the corners of parks in affluent areas. But I think it's a really murky world, actually, the floristry world, when it comes to things like that.
Yeah. And on the are we able to match our margins? It's an economies of scale thing for starter, and also what we do not see is the true cost accounting of the flowers you're seeing in your supermarket. And when I was in Kenya, it was borderline impossible to get in with any of these companies, these large companies who are growing, partly because they're terrified because they've got a lot of bad press, which is good because that is how we put pressure on supermarkets to make standards, setting standards that will encourage. Kenya is an interesting example because they are moving more into integrated pest management and away from chemicals. A lot of those companies are British and Dutch owned, interestingly, from a kind of colonial, post-colonial perspective as well. But in terms of where the impact is, so Lake Naivasha, which is where has historically been hundreds of flower farms, mostly producing roses and various other crops, but roses it's kind of known for. So I think 40% of the roses sold in the UK are directly from Kenya. The impact on a biologically or biodiversity Ramsar site, which is an internationally significant Ramsar site, is astounding. And anyone who talks out about it, I met an incredible campaigner, Enoch Ole Kaminta, who literally had to flee the country for his life because the flower farms kind of oligarchy was putting so much pressure on him that he just had to flee for 6 months, and it was horrific. And so those practices are changing for sure, but they're not changing quick enough. And we simply don't get our eyes on the social impacts, the impacts on water quality for the local community and jobs. And for a place like Kenya, exports are its second largest its second largest export. So there's a whole piece here that we're not doing true cost accounting. So are we able to make more? I think it slightly depends on your no is the answer, but the supermarkets are driving down costs as well. So their expectation on what they can get per stem is always going to be lower than what they're going to get from us. And then there's a case of I'd like to make a living wage. And so I'm going to charge what I need to charge in order to make the business effective and efficient. I got on my high horse there, Liv.
Anybody else want to add anything to those questions?
Did you want to speak about florists on the wholesale import stems versus growing them? Because you're a trained florist and bought wholesale stems, which is very different from supermarket prices.
The fact that as a florist, when you're buying from a wholesaler, it's about the same price, if not more expensive than buying from a retailer buying from a supermarket. So there's a real issue there. But again, I feel like it's a completely different market. I don't think any of us are necessarily in the market for trying to compete with supermarket prices. That's just not what we want to do. It's not. We all know that doesn't pay us or do any good for the environment. So I think this is a completely different market.
We're also offering a very different product. I think if you're, as I sort of keep saying about how many different models there are, there's farmer florists that are adding value. I mean, Roisin does lots of weddings, and so by using your own stems, that you can add labour to that. There's lots of workshops. Just inviting people. People pay me money to come and literally just see where I'm growing, how I'm growing, why I'm growing, and going away and being inspired that way. That's where the agroecological piece comes in. There's ways to make money beyond just the stem price, and those flowers can be a vehicle to different ways of making money and in that business model.
I think also Brexit as well worked in our favour slightly because the price of imported flowers has gone up a lot. So there is, we can match our costs more better.
And the fashion for those kind of stems is just not the market is so big now, as Liv said, for the kind of stems that we're growing naturally, because they speak to a garden, or as most customers will say, a wild flower, because they just see that as something that has come, that's been cut and has been grown, whereas things that you get in cellophane from a supermarket or from a wholesaler don't look like they really have been growing. And there's a big piece there.
Anybody else? In the lovely shirt at the back.
With the vicious dog. Sorry. Question for Calixta. So you say you've got a pick your own flower field. Is that separately, physically, from the flower field where you pick to sell wholesale? And if so, if you have two separate fields, do you grow the same sort of 4 tulip, peony, dahlia, sunflowers for the pick your own, or do you grow a different group of flowers for the pick your own than you do for the others?
Great question. It's very different. So the pick your own field has a lot of diversity in it, lots of perennials, annuals as well. And the idea is that it's an experiential thing for people who are coming. So they certainly would not enjoy it as much if it was lines and lines of sunflowers or whatever else we're growing. So the production for the rest of the business is done separately. We have specific fields for specific things that are mixed in with our other vegetables and other production. And that allows us to manage them more professionally, cut them exactly at the right time, efficiently. And our sort of post-harvest procedures can be improved than if we were picking from some sort of wild wonderland that everyone thinks is beautiful, but actually is very hard to make work financially. And just a piece on the tulips. So they are a pretty big portion. They're the biggest cut flower that we grow, with the biggest proportion of sales and probably the highest profitability. We actually use infrastructure that we already have on the farm to make that work for us. So we buy pre-chilled tulip bulbs from Holland, and we use our walk-in fridges that we have already for our fresh produce to be able to time exact successions to basically improve the reliability of consistent flowering. So this last spring, our first tulips were just before Valentine's Day, which was amazing. And we had them right the way through until middle of May. And we're sort of working with the tulip producer to improve that even more so that we can have them for a longer window, and using the infrastructure. So we grow them in our heated tunnels that we already have heated in our propagation. So we're kind of making use of that infrastructure for multiple different enterprise stacking, very separate though from the sort of pick your own or other enterprises that we're growing.
Anybody else? Bandana.
Hello. I'm a small scale grower on about half an acre at the moment, and I do sort of farmers markets, individual deliveries, that sort of thing. But I'm really keen, I'm sort of expanding every year, and I'm really keen to get into sort of more wholesale to florists and shops and things. But I'm finding it very difficult. People are quite cagey about pricing. So I'm really struggling to sort of work out confidently what I should be selling in a more wholesale sense, by the bucket, that sort of thing. So I wanted some advice on that, perhaps.
Well, that's the perennially difficult question to answer, isn't it? Because of the price fixing issues, so it's really difficult. I think we are all allowed to look at historical data. So I think looking at prices from previous years, there are some wholesalers which are really great at revealing. They send out weekly lists, so it's a good idea to look like that. We at Flowers from the Farm, as part of our CPD seminars, we have had someone on pricing, so that's something that Flowers from the Farm is looking to support people with, is how to price. But like with any produce, it is very dependent on your own costs, so what it costs for someone else to produce might be different to you. But it's usually a case of doing your own research. I believe that there are more almanacs which are available for vegetable growing, aren't there, so that there's more consistent historical pricing, but I don't know because I only grow flowers, not vegetables. But it is a tricky issue. I think that increasingly people are. There was originally a a connotation that British flowers were cheap, but I definitely think that's changing with the kind of flower farmers that are coming up, growing interesting varieties like Calixta spoke to, and that people are willing to pay more for that. And I think paying more for... So I think that's where it's really important to think about what you're growing, because you want to be growing things which, like Anna said, if it's easy for you to grow, cost you less labour, then you can charge, you're getting more for it per stem. But does anyone else want to add anything on pricing?
I'll just say that I'm a massive fan of enterprise budgets, which I know can be a challenge to do, but we find them very, very helpful, which is basically taking every single thing you're growing and really carefully figuring out the exact costs of all the details to do with the seeds and the labour, and not just the actual growing and looking after it, but also harvest, post-harvest, and so on. And I think taking the time to do that can be really valuable, because if you don't know what it really truly does cost you, you might think you're getting a fabulous stem price, charging £2.50 or £5 even a stem, but you're actually maybe losing money on that crop. And I think also in doing enterprise budgets, they're going to be very different for every different farm and grower. And the other thing I'd say is I think not undervaluing the other side of producing anything for anyone, which is the service element. I think you can sell things for more if you're offering fantastic quality customer service and deliveries, and the other things around the actual product, which make life really, really easy for your customer. So I think thinking about what do consumers want, what adds value, if things are wrapped beautifully, if there are other things you can offer, it's amazing how much more you can charge because of what the perceived value is, even if essentially they're buying that same flower.
And also the climate change supply issue for imported flowers is also offering opportunities. So when I was speaking with Petalon, they've started up field flowers, so they're still importing, but they were experiencing like major problems with supply chain, which were impacted. So when I was in Kenya, there'd been major floods, like horrific floods before. And so they couldn't fly the roses out because everything was flooded. The whole infrastructure fell apart. And so Zimbabwe were doing great out of flowers, and Rwanda were doing great out of flowers. And then they experienced flooding. And so that is only going to increase, particularly in Africa in particular, and also places like Colombia. But what florists can get is going to change. So like Gypsophila, there's a specific species of Gypsophila that literally is everyone knows it. It's kind of one species, but it's falling apart. It cannot handle the conditions that we're experiencing in a changed world. And so think also that if florists can't get something, they desperately want it, and brides, as a wedding florist, I know this, have a very specific idea of what they want, very, very hyper-specific idea of what they want, and you can offer that. That's an amazing opportunity. So be steadfast about the fact that you are able to offer something at a time when actually potentially the cost of importing that thing for the florist is astronomical. I mean, it's a difference between like 80 pence a stem. When I was there on the markets, this was happening because of the Kenyan roses thing. It was like, difference between 80 pence a stem and like £2.80 per stem. So it really does skyrocket depending on sourcing and availability.
I think we've got time for one more question.
I was just going to add to the wholesale piece about, I'm desperate to know why you want to sell wholesale. But like genuinely, why are you doing it? Is it because you think it's going to be an easier way of selling your stems? And and thinking about how much space you've got, and when you think about the enterprise budgeting, the kind of scales that you're growing plants on, because that will really affect your stem price. Because there's also those economies of scales and the desirability. If you've got one climber and all the florists want it, but whereas if you've got 10 of them, or you've got 50 linear meters of dahlias as opposed to, an acre, they're all going to have real impact and how much labor all of those different crops cost. So it can be helpful to just get an idea of what the market can take on a stem, but also I think I'd go the other way and think about what are the cheapest things for you to supply that you want to grow and that you most enjoy growing and that you can sell. Like there's just so many elements to it. It's not just about the price.
I think we had one question. I agree.
I think I should ask you really, am I allowed to advertise a bit of land for startup?
Yes, we are collecting people that are interested in who've got land and want people to grow on it.
Marvellous. So we're farmers in North East Lincolnshire on the Wolds. We'd like to advertise a bit of land. If anybody's looking to start up a flower business, or if you've got any other ideas, come and have a word with us. That'd be marvellous. We won't charge the world. We want you to succeed. Yeah, that's the end of that.
Good
Anybody here
opportunity,
from
Lincolnshire?
Thank you. If anybody does want to stay around to ask us any more questions, we'll be here for another half an hour. And just to continue on what this gentleman was saying, we are also looking to land match, because flowers are able to be grown on inaccessible, on difficult pieces of land that you might not think that you can do anything with. So if that is you, or you're looking for land, do come and find us, and we will hopefully be able to start connecting people soon. Thank you. And thank you to our panel. Thank you so much.
Thank you.